Listen carefully. The worst monsters don't kick down your door with guns blazing. They walk right past the security desk in sterile scrubs, smiling at the cameras. When the heir to the city's most brutal syndicate started screaming in the middle of the night, everyone thought it was just the bullet wound. But pain has a specific frequency. What was hiding beneath his head wasn't just a message, it was a promise. Hit play, and let's uncover what was inside the pillow. The fourth floor of Memorial General smelled like bleach, stale coffee, and expensive cologne. It was a contradiction that Clara breathed in 12 hours a day, 4 days a week. The VIP wing wasn't designed for healing. It was designed for discretion. There were no crying families in the waiting room, no squeaking balloons tied to bed frames, just heavy oak doors, private security cameras, and men in poorly fitting suits trying to look inconspicuous while sitting on uncomfortable vinyl chairs. Clara rubbed the back of her neck, feeling the grit of dried sweat at her hairline. Her shift was 8 hours deep. Her lower back throbbed in time with the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. She didn't care about the politics of the city. She cared about her overdue heating bill and the fact that the hospital cafeteria was out of decent espresso. She checked the chart on her tablet. Room 402, Gabriel Costello, 24 years old. Gunshot wound to the lower right abdomen. A clean through and through, miraculously missing the liver and the bowel. The official police report cited a hunting accident. The unofficial whisper around the nurses' station was a botched sit-down with the Southside crew. Clara didn't give a damn either way. To her, Gabriel Costello was just a bed number, a set of vital signs, and a massive pain in her ass. She pushed the heavy oak door open. The room was suffocatingly warm. Gabriel refused to let the nurses open the window, claiming the draft aggravated his stitches. Clara knew it was because he was terrified of a sniper. "Time for meds," she said, her voice flat. Gabriel lay in the center of the mechanical bed, propped up at a 30-degree angle. He looked like hell. The slick, manicured image he projected in the tabloids was gone. His dark hair was matted to his forehead with sweat. The skin around his eyes was bruised a sickly yellowish purple, a byproduct of exhaustion and blood loss. He was gripping the rails of the bed so hard his knuckles were white. "I don't want the pills," he rasped. His voice was raw, grating against his throat. "They're not optional, Mr. Costello." Clara stepped to the side of the bed, snapping a pair of latex gloves over her hands. The loud snap echoed in the quiet room. "Unless you want the infection to spread to your blood and kill you slower than the bullet tried to." Gabriel glared at her. It was a weak glare, stripped of the usual mob air intimidation. "You talk too much. And you complain too much. Swallow." She handed him a tiny paper cup, holding 2 white ovals and a heavy blue painkiller. He didn't move his arms. His breathing was shallow, catching slightly at the end of each exhale. "My neck hurts." Clara sighed, pouring water from a plastic pitcher into a styrofoam cup. "You've been lying flat on your back for 4 days. Your muscles are atrophying. It's normal. It's not normal muscle ache." He shifted, and a sharp hiss escaped his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut. "It's sharp, like burning." Clara set the water down and leaned over him. She wasn't an idiot. She knew how to spot a drug seeker, and she knew how to spot genuine agony. Gabriel's heart monitor was ticking faster. 110 beats per minute. He wasn't faking the distress. She reached out her gloved fingers, pressing gently against the side of his neck. His skin was clammy. Cold sweat. "Where, Bame?" "Base of the skull," he muttered, pulling away from her touch. "Every time I lay back, the pillows in this place are garbage." "They're orthopedic foam," Clara corrected, though she secretly agreed. They felt like concrete bricks. She adjusted the IV line taped to the back of his hand, smoothing down the clear adhesive. "I'll ask Dr. Harrison to prescribe a muscle relaxant in the morning. For now, take the pills. They'll knock you out." Gabriel stared at the paper cup in her hand for a long, quiet moment. He didn't look like a ruthless cartel prince. Stripped of his suits and his bodyguards, he looked like a terrified kid who realized he wasn't immortal. The contradiction bothered Clara. She preferred her monsters to look like monsters. It made it easier to detach. He took the pills with a trembling hand, tossing them back and swallowing the water in one gulp. "Get some sleep," Clara said, turning toward the door. "Hey," she stopped, looking back over her shoulder. Gabriel wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the ceiling tiles, his jaw tight. "Leave the bathroom light on." Clara didn't smile. She didn't offer a platitude. She just walked to the bathroom, flicked the switch, and pulled the door, so only a thin, pale sliver of light spilled across the linoleum. "Call button is on your left," she said, and walked out. Outside the door, his two bodyguards, a pair of walking meat lockers named Frank and Dean, were leaning against the wall, drinking terrible vending machine coffee. "He good?" Frank asked, not looking up from his phone. "He's alive," Clara said, curtly, walking past them. "Try to keep it that way." 3 nights later, the fatigue was a physical weight pressing down on Clara's shoulders. The ward was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a nurse's internal alarm bells ring. Gabriel's incision was healing beautifully. The angry red edges of the wound had settled into a dull pink line. By all medical logic, his pain levels should have been decreasing. He should have been transitioning from intravenous morphine to oral acetaminophen. Instead, his chart read like a downward spiral. He hadn't slept in 72 hours. Clara sat at the nurse's station, scrolling through his vitals. His blood pressure was persistently high. His heart rate hovered in the 120s. Every time Dr. Harrison rounded on him, Gabriel complained of the pain in his neck and head. Harrison, a man who got paid $250,000 a year to not ask questions, wrote it off as psychological trauma. Post-traumatic hyperalgesia, he called it. A fancy way of saying it was all in Gabriel's head. But Clara had watched him. When Gabriel thought no one was looking, he didn't clutch his stomach where the bullet had torn through his flesh. He clutched the back of his head. He paced the small room, dragging his IV pole behind him, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. Whenever exhaustion forced him back into the bed, he would lay down only to jolt upright minutes later, gasping, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "He's in withdrawal," whispered Sarah, another night shift nurse, leaning over Clara's shoulder. "Has to be. Guys like him, they're all hooked on something before they even get shot." "He's clean," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "Tox screen came back empty on admission. It's not drugs." "Then he's just crazy," Sarah shrugged, popping a piece of gum into her mouth. "Not our problem. Just push the dilaudid when he starts yelling." Clara didn't answer. She hated Gabriel Costello. He was arrogant, rude, and represented a world of violence that flooded her emergency rooms with bleeding teenagers. But she was a nurse. A pragmatic, cynical one, but a nurse nonetheless. Pain was a puzzle. And this puzzle didn't have all its pieces. At 2:40 a.m., Clara walked into room 402 for vitals. Gabriel was sitting in the dark armchair in the corner of the room. He hadn't turned on the television. He was just sitting there staring at the empty bed. He looked feral. The shadows under his eyes were so dark they looked like soot smeared across his cheekbones. He hadn't shaved in days. Dark stubble coated his jaw. "Mr. Costello," Clara said softly, not wanting to startle him. He flinched anyway, his head snapping toward her. He relaxed marginally when he saw her blue scrubs. What? You need to get back in bed. I have to check your blood pressure. Do it here. The cuff is attached to the wall monitor. Bed. Now. She didn't have the energy to coddle him. Gabriel slowly pushed himself up from the chair. He moved stiffly, guarding his stomach, but his posture was strange. His neck was rigid. He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, refusing to lean back against the pillows. Clara wrapped the cuff around his bicep and hit the button. The machine whirred, squeezing his arm. 145/90. She read. Your heart is working too hard. You need to sleep, Gabriel. It was the first time she had used his first name. He looked at her, his eyes hollow. I can't. You have to. If you don't sleep, your body won't heal. The wound will reopen. I try, he whispered. His voice cracked. The thick veneer of the Mafia boss's son shattered completely, leaving behind a terrified boy. He suddenly reached out his large, calloused hand, gripping Clara's wrist. His grip was weak, trembling. Clara, I swear to God, something is wrong. Clara looked down at his hand, then up to his face. The desperation in his eyes made her stomach twist. She didn't pull away. Every time I close my eyes, he breathed. Every time I lay my head down, it feels like fire, like bugs crawling under my scalp. It burns. Dr. Harrison checked your neck. There's no rash, no sign of spinal injury. Dr. Harrison is an idiot who cares more about his golf swing than his patients. Gabriel snarled, a brief flash of his old anger returning before dissolving back into exhaustion. I'm telling you, it's not in my head. Well, it is, but... He let go of her wrist and buried his face in his hands. Just give me the shot. Knock me out. Please. Clara stared at him. She looked at the bed. The sheets were twisted, a mess of sweat-soaked cotton. The two pillows at the head of the bed were stacked neatly the way the day shift aides always left them. Standard hospital issue, covered in a waterproof vinyl slip, then a cheap white pillowcase. Lie down, Clara commanded. Gabriel shook his head, keeping his face in his hands. No. Gabriel. Lie down. Let me watch what happens. He looked up at her, suspicious. But the exhaustion won. He slowly rotated his legs onto the mattress. He kept his spine perfectly straight as he lowered himself back. Clara watched his face intently. The moment the back of his head made contact with the top pillow, his eyes blew wide open. His jaw clenched so hard, Clara heard his teeth grind together. A sharp, wet intake of breath tore through his lips. He didn't scream. He just froze, his body going completely rigid, like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and knew moving would kill him. Clara frowned. She stepped closer. What is it? Get it away! He hissed, his voice, strained tears welling in the corners of his bloodshot eyes. Get it away from me. It happened the next night at 3:15 a.m. Clara was in the supply closet, counting inventory on sterile gauze, when the scream tore through the silence of the VIP wing. It wasn't a grunt of pain. It wasn't the angry shout of a patient demanding attention. It was a high, reedy shriek of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the sound of an animal caught in a steel trap. Clara dropped the clipboard. It clattered against the linoleum. She sprinted down the hallway. Outside room 402, Frank and Dean had their guns drawn, their faces pale, aiming their weapons at the heavy oak door. They were supposed to be hardened killers, but they looked terrified. Neither of them made a move to open it. Get out of my way. Clara shoved past Frank, her shoulder colliding with his chest. She slammed the door open. The room was bathed in the harsh, artificial glow of the bathroom light. Gabriel was thrashing on the bed. He had managed to roll onto his side, his hands clawing frantically at the back of his head. He was hyperventilating short, ragged gasps ripping from his chest. Gabriel! Clara rushed to the bed. He didn't hear her. He was trapped in a blind panic. He pulled his hands away from his head, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. There was blood on his fingers, not a lot. Just tiny, bright, crimson smears. She looked past him down at the pillow. The white cotton pillowcase was dotted with a dozen minuscule specks of red, like someone had taken a red pen and violently tapped it against the fabric. Clara's medical training kicked in, shoving the panic down into a cold, dark box in her mind. She grabbed Gabriel's shoulders. He fought her, his muscles tight and unyielding. Stop moving," she barked, her voice echoing off the sterile walls. The absolute authority in her tone broke through his panic. He stopped thrashing, chest heaving, staring up at her with wild, dilated pupils. "My head!" He sobbed, the sound completely devoid of dignity. "It stabbed me." Clara let go of him and looked at the pillow. She pressed her gloved hand flat against the center of it. It felt normal. Soft, yielding. But as she pressed deeper, the heel of her hand met resistance. Something rigid. Something sharp. A tiny prick pierced the latex of her glove, biting into the flesh of her palm. She hissed, yanking her hand back. A single drop of blood welled up on her skin. Frank burst into the room, gun still drawn, sweeping the corners. "Where is he? Who's in here? Put the damn gun away, Frank." Clara snapped her heart, hammering against her ribs. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the pillow. "What happened?" Gabriel gasped, sitting up, wiping the sweat from his eyes. He looked at Clara's hand, then down at the pillow. Clara didn't answer. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out her trauma shears. Heavy, blunt-tipped scissors designed to cut through leather jackets and denim in emergency rooms. She grabbed the edge of the pillowcase and sliced it open. The fabric tore with a loud, violent rip. She pulled the cotton away, revealing the waterproof vinyl slipcover underneath. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the harsh, rasping breath of the Mafia boss's son, and the ticking of the wall clock. Clara wedged the shears into the seam of the vinyl and squeezed. It was thick, resisting the blades, but she forced it, cutting a jagged line straight down the middle of the pillow. She pulled the two halves of the vinyl apart, exposing the dense, yellow orthopedic foam inside. Gabriel leaned over his breathing, stopping entirely. Frank stepped closer, his shadow falling across the bed. Clara reached in and carefully pulled the foam apart. Buried deep inside the center of the pillow, woven intricately into the dense foam, were needles. Dozens of them. They were thin, silver sewing needles. They had been pushed upward from the bottom of the foam, perfectly positioned, so that when the pillow was resting naturally, the tips were hidden just beneath the surface of the vinyl. But the moment any substantial weight was applied, like the heavy, exhausted head of a grown man, the foam would compress, and the needles would push through. They were staggered. A patch of them designed to strike the base of the skull, the back of the neck, the scalp. Clara stared at the glint of the silver metal under the fluorescent light. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a manufacturer's defect. Someone had painstakingly constructed this. They had smuggled it into the hospital, swapped it with Gabriel's actual pillow, and left it there. It was psychological torture, designed to not leave visible gaping wounds, but to inflict agonizing, unexplainable pain every time the victim sought rest. It was designed to make him look crazy, to break his mind before his body even healed. Clara looked up. Gabriel was staring at the needles, his face drained of all color. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something much darker, something cold, ancient, and terrifyingly calm. It was the look of a man who realized the war hadn't ended with the gunshot. The enemy was in the room with them. Clara swallowed hard, the metallic taste of adrenaline coating her tongue. She looked at Frank, who was staring dumbly at the dissected pillow. Someone in this hospital, someone with clearance to walk right into room 402, wanted Gabriel Costello to suffer. And Clara had just ruined their plan. The silence in room 402 was heavy, thick with the smell of old sweat and sharp metallic adrenaline. The severed foam of the pillow lay on the mattress like a dissected lung, exposing its silver, jagged teeth. Gabriel Costello didn't move. His chest rose and fell in shallow, jerky increments. He was staring at the needles, but Clara could tell he wasn't really seeing them anymore. He was seeing the implications. He was tracing the invisible lines of access, calculating who had walked into this room, who had smiled at him, who had fluffed that exact piece of foam and placed it gently beneath his skull. "Close the door," Gabriel said. His voice wasn't the ragged, desperate croak it had been 5 minutes ago. It had dropped an octave. It was flat, carrying the quiet, terrible density of a collapsing star. Frank, standing by the doorway with his weapon still drawn, blinked stupidly. "Boss, we need to sweep the floor. We need to—" "I said close the goddamn door, Frank." Gabriel didn't yell. He didn't have to. The venom in his tone was absolute. Frank swallowed hard, stepping backward, and pulling the heavy oak door shut until the latch clicked. The sound severed the room from the rest of the hospital. They were sealed in. Clara took a step back, her nursing clogs squeaking softly against the linoleum. The sudden violent shift in the room's atmosphere made her skin crawl. A minute ago, Gabriel had been a terrified, broken patient. Now, despite the bruised, sunken eyes and the hospital gown, he was the heir to a criminal empire. And she had just uncovered an assassination attempt right in front of him. "I have to report this," Clara said. Her voice wavered just slightly, and she hated herself for it. "To hospital security, to the police." Gabriel finally tore his eyes away from the pillow. He looked at Clara. His gaze was hollow, lacking any warmth or humanity. "You won't report a thing." "You don't dictate protocol to me." Clara snapped back, her own defensive cynicism flaring to mask her nerves. "This is an active crime scene. Someone brought a weapon into a sterile ward. If I don't call this in, I lose my license. I lose my job. If you call this in, you lose your life." Gabriel shifted on the bed, swinging his legs over the edge. A sharp hiss of pain escaped his teeth as the movement pulled at his abdominal stitches. He gripped his side, his knuckles turning white, but he forced himself to sit upright. "You think the police care about a few needles? You think hospital security can stop whoever did this? The person who put that in my bed bypassed 3 checkpoints and 2 of my own men." He shot a venomous glare at Frank. "They're a ghost. If the cops show up, the ghost disappears. And then they come back with something louder than a sewing kit." Clara stared at him. She wanted to argue, but the cold, ugly logic of his words settled into her stomach like a lead weight. She looked down at his side. A dark, wet stain was blooming across the white fabric of his hospital gown, right over his right hip. The sudden spike in his blood pressure, combined with his thrashing, had done exactly what she feared. "You're bleeding," she said, her professional instincts overriding her fear. Gabriel looked down at his side, as if noticing the blood for the first time. He didn't seem to care. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're tearing the fascia. Lie back down." "I am never lying in that bed again." "Then sit in the chair. But you need to let me stop the bleeding, or you're going to bleed out internally and do their job for them." Gabriel hesitated, his jaw tight. He looked at the armchair in the corner, then back at Clara. He nodded, once a sharp, jerky motion. Frank stepped forward to help him, but Gabriel held up a hand, stopping the bodyguard in his tracks. "Don't touch me." He dragged himself out of the bed, his bare feet hitting the floor. He hunched forward, protecting his torn abdomen, and shuffled the 5 feet to the armchair. He collapsed into it, his head falling back against the vinyl headrest before he violently jerked it forward, the phantom memory of the needles still burning his scalp. He kept his neck rigid, staring straight ahead. Clara moved to the supply cart in the corner. Her hands were shaking slightly as she tore open a package of sterile gauze and grabbed a bottle of iodine. She wasn't an action hero. She was 32, underpaid and exhausted. She wanted to be in her cramped apartment, drinking cheap wine and ignoring her landlord's calls. Instead, she was locked in a room with a bleeding mobster and his incompetent guard. She knelt beside the chair and pulled the fabric of his gown aside. The heavy adhesive bandage over his gunshot wound was soaked through the edges, peeling away from his clammy skin. "This is going to sting," she muttered, ripping the tape off in one smooth motion. Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. He just stared at the blank wall opposite the chair, his eyes dark and unfocused. Clara pressed the fresh iodine-soaked gauze against the weeping wound. The smell of rust and antiseptic filled the small space between them. The flesh around the incision was inflamed, angry red against his pale skin. 2 of the superficial stitches had popped, oozing dark, sluggish blood. "Frank," Gabriel said quietly, his voice hovering just above a whisper. "Where is Dean?" "He's at the end of the hall, boss, watching the elevators." "Bring him in here." Frank hesitated. "Boss, we're supposed to maintain a perimeter." "There is no perimeter." Gabriel barked the sudden volume, making Clara jump her hand, slipping slightly against his wound. He winced but didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on Frank. "The perimeter is a joke. Someone walked right past you. Bring Dean inside. Now." Frank nodded quickly, pulling his radio from his belt. "Dean, get in here. 402. Clara taped down the fresh gauze, her fingers brushing against the taut, rigid muscles of Gabriel's stomach. His entire body was locked in a state of fight or flight. "You need to breathe," Clara said, quietly, keeping her head down. "Your heart rate is still dangerously high." "Who was in this room today?" Gabriel asked, ignoring her medical advice. He looked down at her. Clara kept her eyes on her work, smoothing the edges of the medical tape. "I don't know. The day shift ends at 7 p.m. I clock in at 7:30. The room was empty when I took over your chart." "Who changed the linens?" "An orderly, usually." Clara sat back on her heels, stripping her bloody gloves off and tossing them into the biohazard bin. "But I don't know who was assigned to this wing today." "Find out." "I can't just find out, Gabriel. The shift logs are on the computer at the nurses' station." "Then go look at them. If I leave this room, I am mandated to report the incident. I have a charge nurse. I have security protocols." Gabriel leaned forward, his face inches from hers. The smell of cold sweat and stale breath washed over her. "Clara, look at that bed." He pointed a trembling finger at the dissected pillow. "Someone spent hours building that. They smuggled it in. They swapped it. They didn't use poison. They didn't use a gun. They used pain. They wanted me to go insane before I died. Whoever did that is a sadist, and they are currently walking around your hospital." Clara looked at the needles glinting under the harsh light. A shiver ran down her spine. He was right. And worse, she was the one who had ruined the killer's plan. If they knew she had cut the pillow open. The heavy oak door clicked and pushed open. Dean, the second bodyguard, stepped into the room. He was taller than Frank Lena, with a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow. He looked at Gabriel, then at the torn pillow on the bed, his hand dropping instinctively toward the holster at his waist. What the hell happened? Dean asked. Gabriel didn't answer. He just stared at the two men tasked with keeping him alive. Lock the door behind you, Dean. We're going to have a little chat about who exactly you let through that door today. The air in the room felt visibly thicker. Clara backed away, pressing her spine against the cold tile of the bathroom wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. She wanted no part of what was about to happen. Dean secured the deadbolt and turned back, his eyes darting between the needles on the bed and his boss in the chair. Boss, I swear on my mother, nobody came in here. We checked badges. We checked the food trays. You checked badges, Gabriel repeated softly. He dragged a hand down his face, the dark stubble scratching against his palm. You checked badges. Do you know how easy it is to clone a magnetic strip, Dean? Do you know how easy it is to steal a piece of laminated plastic off an exhausted nurse in the cafeteria? We logged everyone, Frank offered, defensively pulling a small crumpled spiral notebook from his inside jacket pocket. Every doctor. Every nurse. Read it, Gabriel commanded. Frank cleared his throat, squinting at his own handwriting. 0800 Dr. Harrison. 0815 breakfast tray orderly named Luis. 10:30 physical therapy, some guy named Derek. 1300 lunch, Luis again. 1400 day nurse. Jessica. Gave meds. 1600 housekeeping. Lady named Rosa. 1800 dinner tray, Luis. Clara listened, her mind sorting through the hospital roster. Something didn't fit. Read the physical therapy one again, she said from the corner. All three men looked at her. Read it, Gabriel snapped at Frank. 1030. Physical therapy. Derek, Frank repeated. Clara shook her head. There is no physical therapist named Derek on the 4th floor. The PT for the surgical wing is an older woman named Brenda, and occasionally a guy named Mark. But we don't have a Derek. Gabriel's eyes darkened. He looked at Dean. What did this Derek look like? Dean swallowed. Average height, white guy, brown hair, had the blue scrubs on, wore a mask, said it was protocol for the VIP wing. He had a clipboard. Gabriel deadpanned, and a mask, and that was enough for you two idiots to let him walk into my room while I was heavily sedated. He was only in here for 10 minutes, boss, Frank pleaded. He said you were asleep and he just needed to check your range of motion on your legs. He didn't even go near your head. He didn't need to go near my head. Gabriel roared, the sudden explosion of rage, terrifying in its intensity. He tried to stand up, his face contorting in agony as his torn muscles seized and he collapsed back into the chair, gasping for breath. He just needed to swap the pillow while I was out. Clara stepped forward automatically, but Gabriel waved her off, clutching his stomach. He pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger at Frank. You let a ghost in here. Gabriel hissed, his voice ragged. You let him stand over me. You let him touch my bed. Boss, we didn't know. Shut up. Gabriel squeezed his eyes shut, trying to master the pain. When he opened them, the anger had crystallized into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated cruelty. Someone paid you, or someone distracted you. Which one was it, Dean? Dean took a step back, hitting the closed door. Nothing. Nobody paid me, Gabriel. I swear to God, I've been with your father for 10 years. My father isn't the one bleeding in a chair. The tension was a physical pressure in the room. Clara could smell the distinct sour odor of Frank's fear sweat. These were men who killed for a living, and right now they were terrified of a 24-year-old boy in a hospital gown. Clara, Gabriel said, not looking at her. I need you to do something for me. She stiffened. I'm not hurting anyone. Gabriel let out a dry, humorless laugh that ended in a cough. "I don't need you to hurt them. I need you to go to that computer station. I need you to pull the security feed for this hallway at 10:30 a.m. The cameras are on a closed loop," Clara said, shaking her head. "They feed directly to the basement security office. The nurse's station only has access to patient charts and electronic locks." Gabriel cursed a harsh, guttural sound in Italian. He leaned his head back, stopping just short of the chair's headrest, and stared at the ceiling. He knew the blind spots. He wore a mask, a fake name. "We have nothing." "Not nothing," Clara said quietly. She walked past the two terrified bodyguards and approached the bed. She stood over the dissected pillow, staring down at the yellow foam and the silver needles. "Don't touch it," Gabriel warned. "I'm not," she said. She leaned closer, squinting under the harsh overhead fluorescent lights. When she had first cut the pillow open, she had been too focused on the metal. She had seen the needles and assumed they were just shoved into the foam. But looking closer now, with the adrenaline beginning to ebb and her clinical eye taking over, she saw the architecture of the trap. "Look at the base of the needles," she said, pointing with a pen she pulled from her scrub pocket. Gabriel leaned forward in his chair, straining to see. Frank and Dean stayed glued to the wall. "What about them?" Gabriel asked. "They aren't just pushed into the foam," Clara explained, her voice steadying as she fell back into the comfortable realm of anatomy and structure. "Foam is porous. If you just shove a needle into it, it shifts. It falls flat. When you lay your head on it, the needle would just get pushed sideways." She used the tip of her pen to gently pry two pieces of the yellow foam apart. "Whoever did this," Clara continued, "wanted the needles to stay perfectly vertical. They wanted maximum resistance. Hidden deep within the foam, weaving between the bases of the silver needles, was a thin, translucent blue thread. It looped around the eye-hole of each needle, anchoring it tightly to a rigid piece of plastic mesh buried at the bottom of the pillow. "They tied them down," Gabriel observed, his eyes narrowing. "Not just tied," Clara corrected. She leaned in closer, studying the tiny, intricate knots holding the blue thread to the mesh. "Look at the pattern. Loop, cross, pull tight. 2 throws forward, 1 throw back." Gabriel looked up at her confusion, bleeding through his pain. "What does that mean?" Clara stood up, slipping her pen back into her pocket. She looked directly into Gabriel's eyes, the reality of the situation suddenly feeling much darker, much more intimate. "That thread," Clara said, "is 4-0 proline. It's a non-absorbable synthetic suture. We use it for cardiovascular surgery and deep tissue closures." She pointed at the knots. "And that is a perfect textbook surgeon's knot, the kind you learn in your 3rd year of residency." The silence in the room returned heavier than before. "A thug off the street didn't build this," Clara said softly, her eyes sweeping over the horrifying contraption. "A hitman didn't build this. A doctor did. Or a surgical nurse. Someone who knows exactly how to tie a suture blind inside a piece of foam tight enough to hold a needle upright against 10 pounds of skull weight." Gabriel stared at the blue thread. The muscles in his jaw ticked rhythmically. "It's an inside job," Gabriel whispered. "Not just my crew. The hospital." Clara felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. Which means whoever Derek was. Gabriel finished, his eyes locking onto hers. He probably didn't leave the building after his shift. He just changed his scrubs. The realization hung in the air like a localized drop in temperature. Clara rubbed her arms, suddenly acutely aware of how isolated the VIP wing truly was. 4 rooms, 1 exit, endless locked doors. Frank, Gabriel said, his voice stripped of the rage replaced by a chilling, dead calm. "Give me your phone." Frank fumbled in his pocket and produced a sleek black smartphone. He stepped forward and handed it to Gabriel, careful not to get too close. Gabriel didn't unlock it. He flipped it over, popped the protective case off, and wedged his thumbnail into a small groove, snapping the back panel open. He pulled out the battery, then slid a tiny secondary SIM card out from a hidden slot behind the plastic. He tossed Frank's phone onto the floor. "My bag in the closet. Bottom zipper," Gabriel ordered. Dean practically ran to the small mahogany wardrobe, yanking the zipper of Gabriel's leather duffel bag open. He pulled out a thick, outdated flip phone, a burner. He handed it to Gabriel. Gabriel inserted the hidden SIM, slapped the battery in, and powered it on. The harsh beep of the boot-up sequence sounded unnaturally loud. He punched in a number with rapid, practiced movements, holding it to his ear. "It's me," Gabriel said into the receiver. He didn't offer a greeting. "I have a leak. Memorial General. 4th floor. Someone bypassed the outer ring." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. His dark eyes flicked over to Clara, then away. "No, I'm alive," he said, his tone flat. "But they got into the room. They planted a device in my bed. Medical grade. Someone on staff is on the payroll." Another pause. Gabriel winced, shifting his weight in the chair, his hand pressing firmly against the fresh, bloody gauze on his stomach. "I don't care what it takes," Gabriel hissed into the phone, the gangster returning to the surface. "Lock down the building. I want a perimeter outside every exit. Nobody leaves this hospital in scrubs, a suit, or a body bag without you seeing their face. Pull the hospital's security feeds. Hack the mainframe if you have to. Find out who logged into the surgical supply closet in the last 48 hours and checked out 4-0 proline sutures." He hung up, snapping the flip phone shut with a sharp clack. Clara watched him, a strange mixture of revulsion and awe warring in her chest. A few minutes ago, he was a victim. Now he was mobilizing a small army from a vinyl hospital chair. "You can't just lock down a hospital," Clara said, finding her voice. "We have ambulances coming in. Emergency surgeries." "My men won't stop the ambulances," Gabriel said, dropping the burner phone into his lap. "But they will stop anyone trying to walk out the front doors to the parking garage." He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time since she had walked into the room. The clinical detachment she had tried to maintain was cracking. Her hair was falling out of its messy bun, her under-eye circles mirrored his own, and there was a tiny smear of his blood on the sleeve of her blue scrubs. "You figured out the thread," he said quietly. Clara crossed her arms, defensive. "I'm a nurse. It's my job to notice things." "Your job is to push pills and change bandages," Gabriel countered. "You could have ignored the needles. You could have run out of the room. You could have called security and let them handle it. Why did you stay?" "Because you were bleeding through your stitches," she snapped, annoyed by the interrogation. "And because I don't like my patients being tortured on my watch, even the arrogant ones." A ghost of a smirk touched the corner of Gabriel's mouth, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. It was the first genuinely human expression she had seen him make that wasn't rooted in agony or rage. "You're smart, Clara," he said softly. The use of her name sent an uncomfortable ripple through her. "But you're in the deep end of the pool now." "I am standing on the dry tile," she shot back. "Once your men clear the floor, I am going back to the nurses' station, I am finishing my shift, and tomorrow I am putting in a transfer request to pediatrics." "You think they don't know who you are?" Gabriel asked, his voice dropping, taking on a dark, cautionary tone. "You're the night nurse. You're the one who answered the call button. You're the one who cut the pillow open. They spent hours setting that trap, waiting for me to lose my mind." "You ruined it." Clara swallowed hard. She looked at the torn pillow again. The silver needles gleamed like tiny daggers. "They won't just walk away," Gabriel continued. "If they couldn't break me with pain, they will pivot. They will come back to finish the job. And now they know you're the one protecting me." "I'm not protecting you," she lied, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm doing my job." "To them it's the same thing." Gabriel leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his abdomen. His dark eyes locked onto hers with a fierce, magnetic intensity. "I need you, Clara," she scoffed, taking a step back. "You have 2 armed goons and an army surrounding the building." "My armed goons," he said, shooting a look of utter disgust at Frank and Dean. "Let the assassin walk right past them. My army is outside. The killer is inside. They know this hospital. They know the blind spots. They know the medical supplies. I don't." He reached out his hand, hovering in the space between them. It was a plea, raw and imperfect. "I don't know who to trust in this building," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "But I trust the woman who stopped my bleeding instead of running for the door. Help me find them, before they try again." Clara looked at his outstretched hand. It was stained with his own blood. The air in the room smelled like iodine fear and ozone. She was a cynical, underpaid nurse who just wanted to pay her heating bill. She hated the Mafia. She hated the violence. But as she looked at the perfect surgical knots holding those silver needles in place, a different, colder truth settled over her. Gabriel was right. The monster wasn't at the door. The monster was wearing scrubs, walking the halls, and they knew Clara's face. She didn't take his hand, but she didn't leave the room either. "The surgical supply closet?" Clara said, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial murmur. "It's on the 3rd floor. You need a key card with level 4 clearance to get the proline sutures. Only attending surgeons and the charge nurse have that clearance." Gabriel lowered his hand, his eyes burning with renewed focus. The game had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a hunt. "Then let's go find the charge nurse," Gabriel said. "A hospital at 3 in the morning is a graveyard waiting for its occupants." The fluorescent overheads hummed with a sick yellow vibration, casting long shadows down the freshly waxed linoleum. "You can't walk," Clara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the frantic energy that had gripped her 10 minutes ago. Acceptance was a cold blanket. She had crossed a line, stepping out of her role as a healer and into the paranoid, insulated bubble of a cartel heir. Gabriel was still sitting in the vinyl armchair, his hand rigidly pressing against his bleeding abdomen. His breathing was shallow. "I can walk." "You have a torn fascia and active hemorrhaging," she retorted, turning her back on him to scan the hallway. "If you rip the internal sutures, your bowels will spill into your abdominal cavity. You'll go into septic shock before we reach the elevator." She didn't wait for his permission. Clara jogged quietly down the hall to the storage alcove and pulled out a standard-issue transport wheelchair. Its metal frame was battered, the synthetic leather seat cracked and peeling. She wheeled it backward into room 402, locking the brakes with a sharp click of her shoe. "Sit," she ordered. Gabriel stared at the chair with deep, visceral disgust. For a man whose entire authority relied on projecting untouchable strength, the wheelchair was a profound humiliation. He looked at Dean, who was hovering near the door, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Not a word," Gabriel warned his bodyguard. He gripped the armrests of the chair and transferred his weight. A strangled, wet sound clawed its way up his throat as his abdominal muscles stretched. He collapsed into the seat, his skin turning the color of wet ash. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, and he squeezed his eyes shut, riding out the wave of agony. Clara moved behind him, gripping the rubber push handles. "Frank," she said, looking at the heavier of the 2 bodyguards. "Stay here. Lock the door. If anyone comes looking for him, you tell them he's in the bathroom, and you aren't opening the door for God himself." Frank nodded, looking relieved to be left behind. "Dean, you take the point." Gabriel rasped, his eyes snapping open. "Service elevator, not the main lobby. If you see a shadow move, you put a hollow point in it." Dean drew his weapon. The dull metallic shk of a round being chambered sounded obscenely loud in the sterile room. Clara pushed the chair forward. The wheels squeaked a rhythmic, high-pitched chirp that set her teeth on edge. They exited the VIP wing, slipping through the heavy double doors into the dimly lit service corridor. It smelled fundamentally different here. Gone was the sharp scent of iodine and bleach, replaced by the heavy, stale odor of industrial floor wax, old laundry, and cold cafeteria grease. "The surgical supply closet is on the 3rd floor," Clara whispered, leaning down slightly so her voice carried only to Gabriel. "It's in the restricted corridor behind the main ORS." Gabriel didn't look back. His hands gripped his knees, knuckles white. "Who has access?" "Attending surgeons, anesthesiologists, the charge nurses. It requires a level 4 badge swipe and a numeric PIN. "You have one." "No," Clara said tightly. "I'm a floor nurse. I have level 2. But I know where charge nurse Miller keeps her spare badge. She hides it in the top drawer of the 3rd floor administrative desk because she's always losing her primary." "Sloppy," Gabriel muttered. "Human," Clara corrected. Not everyone lives their life expecting an assassin in the linen closet. They reached the service elevator. Dean pressed the down button. The massive steel doors parted with a sluggish, groaning rumble. They stepped inside. It was a freight car, walls lined with scuffed wooden bumpers designed to move morgue gurneys and bulk oxygen tanks. The air was frigid. As the elevator descended, Clara looked down at the crown of Gabriel's head. His dark hair was still damp with sweat. He was a killer. He belonged in prison or in the ground, according to every rational bone in her body. Yet staring at the vulnerability of his slumped shoulders, the human contradiction gnawed at her. Pain was the ultimate equalizer. Stripped of his suits and his money, he was just a terrified, bleeding 24-year-old kid. The elevator lurched to a halt. 3rd floor. Dean held his gun close to his chest, peering out into the corridor. "Clear." Clara pushed the wheelchair out. The 3rd floor was eerily silent. The surgical wings only operated at this hour for extreme emergencies, and tonight the trauma boards were empty. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ice machine down the hall and the infernal squeaking of Gabriel's wheelchair. She steered him past the dark, glass-walled waiting rooms and into the administrative hub. It was a circular nurses' station, surrounded by locked file cabinets and computer terminals. "Keep watch," Gabriel told Dean. The bodyguard backed into the shadow of a vending machine, his eyes scanning the long, empty hallway. Clara moved behind the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. It felt like breaking and entering, even though she belonged in this building. She pulled open the top left drawer of the charge nurse's desk. Pens, sticky notes, a half-eaten roll of mints. She shoved her hand toward the back, feeling along the underside of the faux wood paneling. Her fingers brushed against a strip of plastic tape. She pulled. A laminated level 4 access badge came free in her hand. "Got it," she breathed. Gabriel rotated the wheels of his chair, turning to face the locked heavy metal door of the surgical supply room down the adjacent hall. "Let's see who likes sewing in the dark." The surgical supply room was a windowless vault, roughly the size of a small convenience store. Clara pressed Nurse Miller's badge to the black wall reader. It beeped a sharp, affirming green tone. She punched in the 4-digit pin she had watched Miller type 100 times, 0412. The heavy door unlocked with a deep mechanical thud. Clara pushed Gabriel inside and quickly pulled the door shut behind them, locking them in. The room was a labyrinth of wire racks, stacked floor to ceiling with cardboard boxes, plastic bins, and sterile blue wraps. It smelled overwhelmingly of isopropyl alcohol and fresh cardboard. "The Pyxis machine is in the back," Clara said, moving past a rack of IV bags. "It's the automated dispensing cabinet. It logs every high-value item removed, cross-referencing it with the badge used to open the drawer." Gabriel wheeled himself forward, his eyes darting through the narrow aisles, paranoid. "Hurry!" They reached the back wall. The Pyxis machine stood like a monolithic ATM, its screen glowing a pale, ghostly blue in the dim light of the storage room. Clara stepped up to the keyboard. She scanned Miller's badge again. The system requested a fingerprint. Clara froze. "Damn it! It's biometric for the override." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Can you bypass it?" "I'm a nurse, Gabriel, not a hacker." She stared at the screen, her mind racing. "Wait. Suture material isn't a narcotic. It's high value, but it's not a controlled substance. I don't need to dispense it. I just need to pull the inventory query. The terminal on the wall over there, it tracks the physical counts." She abandoned the Pyxis and moved to a standard beige computer terminal mounted on a swinging arm nearby. She wiggled the mouse. The screen woke up, demanding a login. Clara typed in her own credentials. The system accepted her, bringing up the hospital's internal intranet. Her hands were shaking. She forced herself to breathe, her fingers flying over the keys as she navigated to the inventory sub-menu. "Item code," she muttered to herself. "Proline 4-0. Suture synthetic non-absorbable." She found the catalog number and hit enter. A spreadsheet populated the screen, listing dates, times, quantities, and the names of personnel who had withdrawn the specific surgical thread over the last 48 hours. Clara's eyes scanned the list. May 12th, 0900, Dr. Aris, quantity 2. May 12th, 14:30, Nurse Jenkins, quantity 1. May 13th, 11:15, Dr. Evans, quantity 3. May 14th. Her finger stopped on the glass. Today, May 14th. 02:15, Dr. Emmett Cross, quantity 5. A cold, heavy dread settled into Clara's chest. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "Who is it?" Gabriel demanded, wheeling closer, his arm brushing against her scrub pants. "Dr. Cross," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the computer tower. "Emmett Cross. He's a third-year surgical resident." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, his mind calculating. Cross. Was he in the operating room when they pulled the bullet out of me? Clara looked down at him, her stomach churning. Yes. He was the assisting surgeon. "He closed your incision?" "He knows my anatomy," Gabriel said softly, the realization clicking into place. "He knows the layout of the VIP wing. He knows the exact dosage of the sedatives they've been pumping into my IV, and he knows how to tie a perfect surgeon's knot." "But why?" Clara asked, stepping back from the monitor. "He's a doctor. He has a career, a life. Why would he risk it to put needles in your pillow?" Gabriel let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Because someone offered him a better life, or threatened the one he has. Loyalty has a price tag, Clara. In my world, doctors are just hitmen with better PR." He grabbed the wheels of his chair, preparing to turn around. "We have a name. I need to get back to my phone. I need to make a call." Suddenly, the harsh electronic blare of the hospital's PA system shattered the silence of the supply room. It wasn't the gentle melodic chime used for visiting hours. It was a sharp, rapid, three-burst siren that made Clara's blood run cold. "Code blue. Code blue. 4th floor. VIP wing. Room 402. The automated voice was flat, emotionless, repeating the death knell over the intercom. Clara and Gabrielle locked eyes. "Frank," Gabrielle whispered. "Room 402. Someone had just flatlined." But Gabriel wasn't in the room. Only Frank was. "He went back," Clara said, panic finally breaking through her clinical detachment. "Cross went back to your room to finish it. He thinks you're in the bed. Code blue. 4th floor, VIP wing. Room 402. We have to move." Gabriel barked, ignoring the tearing pain in his gut as he shoved the wheels of the chair forward. "Open the door." Clara ran to the heavy metal door and slammed her hand against the release bar. The door swung open, spilling them back out into the dimly lit hallway. Dean was gone. The vending machine where he had been standing was empty. A half-finished bottle of water lay on its side on the linoleum, a dark, viscous puddle spreading slowly outward from beneath it. Blood. Gabriel stopped the wheelchair. His eyes locked onto the crimson pool. His face hardened the last vestiges of the frightened patient, vanishing replaced entirely by the cartel air. "He's not upstairs," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "He triggered the code blue from a wall terminal to draw security away." Clara backed away from the blood, her shoes squeaking against the wax. "Gabriel." "He's on this floor, Clara." Before Clara could process the words, the heavy metal doors of the stairwell 30 feet away burst open. Dr. Emmett Cross didn't look like an assassin. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He was wearing green surgical scrubs, the fabric loose and comfortable. A blue surgical mask hung loosely around his neck. His brown hair was a messy, unwashed tangle. But in his right hand, he wasn't holding a clipboard. He was holding a suppressed 9mm pistol, the elongated black cylinder of the silencer looking absurdly out of place under the bright, sterile lights. He stopped dead when he saw them in the hallway. He had expected to find them hiding, not sitting out in the open. His eyes darted from Gabriel in the wheelchair to Clara standing beside him. "Dr. Cross." Clara breathed the words falling out of her mouth out of sheer stupid habit. Cross raised the weapon. His hand was trembling. He wasn't a professional killer. He was terrified. "Clara, get away from him." Gabriel didn't yell. He didn't cower. He sat perfectly still in the wheelchair, his dark eyes fixed on the resident. "How much did my uncle pay you, Emmett? Was it enough to cover the malpractice insurance?" Cross's jaw clenched. "Shut up. You're a parasite. Your family flooded the ER with overdose victims for a decade. I'm just cutting out the tumor." "You're shaking." Gabriel noted his voice, smooth, almost hypnotic. "You tied a flawless knot in the dark, but you can't hold 4 pounds of steel steady. You're going to miss Emmett. And if you don't kill me with the first shot, I promise you what I do to you will make the needles feel like a massage." "I said step away from him, Clara." Cross shouted his voice, cracking the gun, sweeping wildly to point at her chest. Clara froze. The hollow black eye of the silencer stared at her. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was just the night nurse. "Don't shoot her, you idiot!" Gabriel snapped, leaning forward, deliberately drawing the gun back to himself. "She's a witness. You kill her. You can't make this look like a rival hit." Gabriel's hand slid down the side of his leg, dropping out of Cross's line of sight, inching toward the hollow metal tubing of the wheelchair's footrest. "It's over, Costello," Cross said, walking forward, slowly, his finger whitening on the trigger. "The perimeter is gone. Dean is dead in the stairwell. Frank is bleeding out upstairs. Just close your eyes." Clara's medical instincts clashed violently with her survival instincts. She saw the tension in Cross's shoulder. She saw the micro-expression of absolute resolve harden his face. He was going to pull the trigger. She didn't think. She just reacted. Clara grabbed the heavy metal IV pole standing next to the supply room door, a solid steel rod with a heavy star-shaped base. With a primal, ragged scream that tore her throat, she swung it like a baseball bat. The heavy steel pole collided with Cross's forearm just as the gun discharged. Pfft! The suppressed gunshot sounded like a violent sneeze. The bullet shattered the glass of the vending machine behind Gabriel, raining cheap candy and tempered glass over the linoleum. Cross howled in pain, the gun clattering to the floor. The bone in his forearm snapped with a sickening wet crack. He stumbled backward, clutching his mangled arm, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at Clara, entirely unable to comprehend that the cynical, tired night nurse had just broken his arm. Before Cross could recover, Gabriel lunged, ignoring his torn abdomen, ignoring the agonizing fire ripping through his stitches. The Mafia boss's son threw himself out of the wheelchair. He tackled Cross to the ground, the sheer momentum of his body weight, bringing the doctor down hard onto the slick tile. Gabriel's hospital gown rode up, exposing the fresh, bleeding bandages on his stomach, but he didn't care. He pinned Cross to the floor. His left hand wrapped around Cross's throat, crushing the resident's windpipe with terrifying, brutal efficiency. Cross thrashed violently, his unbroken arm clawing at Gabriel's face, drawing long, bloody tracks down his cheek. But Gabriel didn't flinch. The cold, ancient cruelty Clara had glimpsed in the VIP room was fully unleashed. Gabriel wasn't a patient anymore. He was the apex predator of the city's underworld. "You don't play in my world, Doctor," Gabriel hissed, leaning his weight into his grip, his knuckles turning white. "You die in it." "Gabriel, stop!" Clara screamed, dropping the IV pole. The metallic clatter rang out in the hallway. "You're killing him!" Gabriel didn't hear her. The bloodlust was deafening. Cross's face was turning a deep, mottled purple. His eyes bulged blood vessels bursting in the sclera. His thrashing weakened, becoming desperate, jerky spasms. Clara lunged forward, grabbing Gabriel's shoulder. "Stop if you kill him! We don't know who hired him. We don't know who the uncle is working with." Gabriel froze. The logic pierced the red haze of his rage. His chest heaved, a wet, bloody cough racking his frame as the adrenaline began to crash, leaving behind the devastating reality of his physical trauma. He slowly released his grip on Cross's throat. The doctor gasped, a horrific whistling sound, as air rushed back into his bruised trachea. He curled into a fetal position, weeping and coughing up spittle, clutching his broken arm. Gabriel rolled off him, collapsing onto his back on the cold linoleum. The white hospital gown was completely soaked through with dark arterial blood. He had torn his internal stitches. He stared up at the fluorescent lights, his breathing ragged and wet. Clara fell to her knees beside him. She didn't look at Cross. She looked at Gabriel's stomach. The bleeding was catastrophic. "You ripped the fascia," she said, her voice shaking, her hands instantly pressing down hard on his abdomen to apply pressure. The hot, sticky blood welled up between her fingers. Gabriel looked at her. His eyes were losing focus, the edges of his vision bleeding out into darkness. But that faint, terrifying ghost of a smirk returned to his lips. "You hit him," Gabriel whispered, blood staining his teeth. "With an IV pole. Shut up and don't die on me." Clara cried, tears of pure, unadulterated stress finally spilling hot down her cheeks. She pressed harder, fighting a losing battle against his failing body. He reached up his bloody hand, weakly wrapping around her wrist. "You're in it now, Clara. You saved my life." He closed his eyes, his head lolling to the side, slipping into the dark. Clara knelt in the blood-soaked hallway, surrounded by shattered glass, a weeping assassin, and an unconscious Mafia boss. The distant wail of actual police sirens began to cut through the night. She looked at her hands, stained crimson, and realized Gabriel was right. The worst monsters don't kick down doors. Sometimes they just invite you inside. Clara saved a monster, but in the Mafia, every debt demands a payment in blood. Did Gabriel's uncle orchestrate this alone? Or is the hospital hiding deeper, darker secrets? The war is just beginning, and Clara is right in the crossfire. If you felt your heart pounding during that hallway showdown, smash that like button and share this story with someone who loves dark, grounded suspense. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a chapter. Drop a comment below. Would you have swung that IV pole or let the assassin finish the job? See you in the next one.